Something strange happened at Wimbledon this week, and unless you were watching closely, you could have missed it completely. On the surface, everything still looked picture perfect. The grass was still that almost unreal shade of green. The roof opened whenever the London weather decided to cooperate. The tennis remained world-class. The quarterfinals were underway. And by every traditional measure, this should have been the most exciting stretch of the tournament. But something felt different. Walk around the grounds, listen to the outer courts, or spend 30 seconds scrolling through tennis clips online, and you could sense it immediately. The noise that had been shaking the All England club just 2 days earlier had faded. The emotional charge that made this year's Wimbledon feel fresh, unpredictable, and unlike anything in recent memory had quietly slipped away. The tournament had returned to being more familiar, more reserved, more polite. In other words, more like the Wimbledon everyone expected before Alex Eala turned the place upside down. Across social media, the same 3 words kept appearing: no Alex, no crowd. It sounds like a simple fan reaction, maybe even an exaggeration. But look at how quickly it spread and how much discussion it created among supporters, journalists, former players, and people who have covered professional tennis for decades. That reaction was not just background noise. It was a signal, and it exposed a larger issue the WTA has been able to avoid for far too long. Alex did not create that issue. She simply became the player who made it impossible to ignore. To understand how we reached this point, you have to go back to the beginning of her run, because the atmosphere surrounding her did not suddenly appear during one dramatic center court victory. It grew, match by match, crowd by crowd, and moment by moment. The first clues appeared in one of the least glamorous places at any Grand Slam, the practice courts. Normally, practice sessions are among the quietest parts of the tournament. A few hardcore fans might arrive early to watch a player stretch, work through serving drills, and trade routine ground strokes with a coach. It is tennis stripped of the drama. No scoreboard pressure, no match points, no roaring crowd. But whenever Alex's name appeared on the practice schedule, that sleepy corner of Wimbledon stopped being sleepy. Fans began lining up several rows deep just to watch her warm up. They stood patiently through repetitive drills and ordinary serve practice because simply being close to her felt important. Tournament employees who had worked at Wimbledon for years reportedly noticed the pattern almost immediately. Every time Alex appeared on a schedule, the size of the crowd did not match the occasion, it exceeded it. And that was only practice. Once her actual matches began, the situation jumped to another level. Her second-round match was placed on court 12, a venue holding roughly 1,500 spectators, and demand became so intense that officials reportedly discussed how to manage the overflow. The seats were packed, but the interest did not stop at the entrances. Fans crowded the surrounding areas, hoping for any possible glimpse of the action. Philippine flags were not limited to one small section either. They appeared throughout the grounds, turning what might normally have looked like a modest group of traveling supporters into something much bigger. Inside the All England Club, one of the most exclusive, tradition-heavy sporting venues on earth, Alex somehow had what felt like a home crowd. After winning the match, she leaned toward the microphone and thanked her supporters in Tagalog. The reaction was instant, emotional, and far louder than the restrained response normally associated with Wimbledon. Alex later admitted that even she was stunned. She said Filipino fans continued to surprise her in the best way, and that she never imagined she could experience anything close to a home court atmosphere at Wimbledon. Think about that. Alex was the reason those fans were there, yet even she had underestimated how large the movement around her had become. The online numbers made the scale even clearer. Her third-round victory over the defending champion became the most watched video posted on Wimbledon's own YouTube channel during the entire fortnight, climbing beyond 1 million views. Her post-match press conference attracted nearly 600,000 views. That's worth pausing on because press conferences are usually the videos casual sports fans skip. They might watch the winning point, a short highlight package, or an emotional on-court interview, but they rarely sit through a player answering questions in a media room. With Alex, they did. Her social media posts reached millions throughout the tournament, and the audience was not limited to longtime tennis followers. Her victory over the defending champion was not spreading only because dedicated fans were passing it around. People who had never watched a complete tennis match were clicking on the clips. They were sharing videos of Alex talking about her ruffled socks and her grandfather. They watched her become emotional, then heard her immediately tell the crowd that she still was not satisfied. After that, they searched for her name and looked up the date of her next match. That is not normal audience growth. That's what happens when a sports story breaks beyond its established fan base and reaches people who previously had no connection to the game. For the WTA, this should have set off every possible alarm bell, in the best way. It was a clear sign that something enormous was happening, and the moment needed to be handled with care, creativity, and a real long-term strategy. Instead, the organization that stood to benefit most appeared almost completely surprised, not only by the size of Alex's following, but also by what happens when so much attention becomes concentrated on one player. The warning signs had been visible long before Wimbledon.
Earlier in the season, Alex's appearance at the Dubai Duty-Free Tennis Championships reportedly helped drive a 48% increase in ticket sales compared with the previous year. Tournament officials openly acknowledged that her matches were selling out and that her name on the order of play was carrying extraordinary commercial weight. Then came the Australian Open, where fans formed actual lines outside the practice courts hours before Alex was scheduled to appear. Security personnel were faced with crowd sizes that nobody seems to have properly anticipated. These were not isolated incidents. They appeared at multiple tournaments, on different surfaces, and at different stages of the season. The same message kept arriving, yet there seemed to be very little serious organizational planning around what it means to have a player generating this much cultural and commercial pull. Dubai offered the clearest example of that strategic gap. Alex was scheduled in the night session to open the quarterfinals. Her match against Coco Gauff was followed by another quarterfinal featuring two different players. On paper, that looks like an ordinary scheduling decision, the kind tournaments make all season without controversy. In reality, it created a predictable problem. A large percentage of the audience had purchased tickets specifically to watch Alex. Once her match ended, many of those spectators had no emotional reason to remain for the next contest. The players who followed deserved a full, engaged crowd, regardless of who had played before them. But anyone thinking seriously about audience behavior should have anticipated what Alex's presence would do to the flow of attention across that session. Apparently, nobody had planned far enough ahead. When an organization fails to think through a phenomenon of this size, it ends up reacting after the fact instead of preparing in advance. That is exactly where the WTA found itself when Alex lost in the fourth round at Wimbledon and parts of the crowd began visibly clearing out. The no Alex, no crowd response that exploded online was not manufactured outrage. It was not simply an algorithm pushing people into another meaningless debate. It was a spontaneous reaction from real fans who had traveled real distances, spent real money, and felt the atmosphere change the moment she was eliminated. Wimbledon tickets are famously difficult and expensive to obtain. Some supporters had flown from the Philippines specifically for the tournament. Others belonged to Filipino communities across Europe and had built in travel plans around Alex's schedule. Some had never seriously followed women's tennis until this summer. They discovered her through viral clips, emotional interviews, and social media posts, then decided they wanted to experience the story in person while they still have the chance. When her fourth round match ended, the person who had drawn many of them to London was suddenly gone from the competition. Wimbledon continued, of course. The tournament does not stop for any one athlete, but the atmosphere afterward was noticeably different from the energy that had been building for 2 weeks. The change could be seen in the seats, heard around the grounds, and felt across social media. So what is the no Alex, no crowd conversation really about once you remove the fan frustration and online arguments? At its core, it is about dependency, specifically the WTA's dependency on a small group of players to generate the crowd energy, viewership, and commercial excitement that make the entire tour feel relevant to a wider audience. This is not a brand new problem. Women's tennis has spent years trying to expand its reach, attract audiences in regions that have not traditionally followed the sport, fill stadiums, strengthen emotional loyalty, and give sponsors a reason to remain invested. Alex represents a massive opportunity in the middle of that challenge. She is doing naturally what sports organizations spend millions trying to create through advertising campaigns, building authentic emotional investment among an audience that previously had no reason to follow professional tennis. The Philippines is a nation of more than 100 million people, where basketball and boxing have traditionally dominated the sports conversation. Yet huge numbers of Filipinos were suddenly staying awake through the night to watch a Grand Slam tennis match. Families and friends gathered for watch parties. Clips, reactions, and highlights flooded social platforms. Supporters flew across the world, lined up for tickets, and transformed random corners of the All England Club into something that felt like a home venue for a player competing thousands of miles away. You can't simply purchase that kind of connection. You can't guarantee it through polished marketing, a new streaming deal, or a clever hashtag campaign. It happens when a real athlete achieves something extraordinary and an entire community sees part of itself in her story. The WTA did not create this moment, and realistically, no organization could have manufactured it from scratch. But the tour is responsible for what happens next. It has to determine how to build a structure that does not appear to lose its pulse the moment one popular player exits to draw. Even other players recognize the situation. After the awkward scheduling dynamic in Dubai, Coco Gauff publicly apologized to Alex's supporters, acknowledging that her own match had landed in a difficult position because of where the crowd's attention was focused. Consider what that says. One of the sport's biggest stars felt the need to address the situation publicly. That shows how obvious the dynamic had become even before Wimbledon began. None of this should be interpreted as criticism of Alex's opponents or any other player on tour. Every competitor deserves a packed stadium and an enthusiastic audience. The problem is not that Alex's fans care too much. The problem is that the tour's strategy for building on the momentum she creates has not kept up with the scale of her impact. The WTA needs a way to convert the attention Alex brings to individual tournaments into lasting interest in women's tennis as a whole. The supporters traveling to see her are not indifferent spectators. They have demonstrated deep emotional investment by flying around the world, spending serious money, and waiting for hours just to watch her compete or practice. If the tour can give those fans reasons to continue watching after Alex is eliminated, then her impact grows instead of disappearing with one loss. Solving that problem will require genuine creativity and perhaps some uncomfortable internal honesty. Is the current structure truly designed to build long-term fan loyalty, or has the tour been relying on the popularity of a few major stars without creating anything durable underneath them? But beneath the questions about ticket sales, scheduling, and audience strategy lies an even more important story, what Alex represents for the future of tennis itself. She is only 21 years old. She reached the fourth round of a Grand Slam for the first time. She defeated the defending champion on center court in straight sets. She pushed a former Grand Slam finalist into a deciding set during a match lasting more than 2 hours. And she accomplished all of that while still possessing obvious areas for improvement. Martina Navratilova, one of the greatest players in tennis history, publicly suggested that Alex could eventually serve roughly 20 miles per hour faster, and that she is not yet fully utilizing the natural advantages of being left-handed. That is not an attack on her performance. It is a description of her potential. The player who defeated the defending Wimbledon champion is not the finished version of Alex Eala. She is still developing, still learning, and still discovering how high her game can go. Everything seen during these 2 weeks suggests the direction is sharply upward. After her 4th-round loss, Alex spoke about wanting to pave the way for young girls, inspire people, and make meaningful use of the platform she has been given. Watching her speak, it did not sound like a polished answer prepared for the cameras. She appeared to mean every word. That same authenticity showed up throughout the tournament, from the social media moment involving her friend and the Princess of Wales, to the emotional on-court interview where she fought back tears, and then reminded everyone that she was not satisfied. No marketing department can reproduce that kind of sincerity. There will always be talented young players. There will be other athletes from countries without deep tennis traditions who break through and create excitement. But the exact combination that produced this Wimbledon phenomenon, the skill, personality, timing, cultural significance, and emotional connection, is specific to Alex. You can't simply assign the same role to another player and expect an identical result. The WTA's responsibility is to build a tour that works for every athlete and every fan base, not only for whichever player becomes the biggest story of a particular fortnight. That's a structural challenge requiring a structural solution. Alex has simply made the problem impossible to postpone, because her performances have shown what becomes possible when a player connects with a global audience on this scale. And now the next chapter is already approaching. The hardcourt swing is right around the corner, with Washington and the US Open ahead. Alex will enter that stretch ranked higher than she has ever been, carrying specific technical feedback from one of the most respected voices in tennis, and the kind of confidence that can only come from being tested deep in a Grand Slam and discovering that you belong there. She told the Wimbledon crowd that she was not satisfied. Based on everything she showed during this run, that did not sound like a slogan. It sounded like a warning.